welcome to our first online notes presentation. We're talking about Chapter 13 and the Age of Exploration. This will be Section 1, Exploration and Expansion. Okay, so there were many motivations for the Europeans to do this. The Europeans wanted to get to Asia. They had read Marco Polo's book, The Travels, which outlined all of the stuff that he saw in India and China on his way to the court of Kublai Khan, and wanted to experience that, as well as bring the spices and other things that were found in India and Asia to Europe at cheaper prices than what they were receiving them. So it was economic as well. The spices were very pricey when they reached Europe, and part of the experience had been of those that had gone on the Crusades during the medieval times. They had experienced these things at a much cheaper price because they were in the area where the trading was happening quite a bit. So they wanted to get these things back to Europe. And if you look at your map to the right, it shows how all of these goods were being moved to Europe through the Silk Road, through sea and land routes. Nobody sailing around Africa at the time. So they were using not only the sea, but the land routes as well. There was also this idea of carrying Christianity to the rest of the world. They wanted to bring the Catholic faith, convert natives and others that had not experienced Christianity to them. The quote from Hernan Cortez in your book is that all natives are introduced into Holy Catholic faith. So religious zeal as well. So these three things combined are our motives for the Europeans to explore as they did. And we call them the 3 G's. Write them down. God, glory, gold. Those 3 G's motivated the Europeans to do what they did. They wanted to gain the glory of being the first to do it, to be able to bring back riches to their countries, to bring back riches to the countries that sponsored them on their voyages. They wanted gold. Obviously, they want to get rich. Many of these guys came from middle-class families, maybe even lower-class families, had their fathers and others had been sailors and been involved in sailing early on, and they wanted to get their riches and get not only their fame, but get the money. And then carrying God to all of those, spreading Christianity, and expanding the faith. They were very religious, as we have talked about in the past, and they wanted to bring that religion to others. Alright, so our first exploring country is Portugal. A man by the name of Prince Henry the Navigator created a school, and this school was built to teach young men of Portugal how to be better sailors. So beginning around 1420, he began to really sponsor voyages along the path of Africa, finding a westward or an eastward route to Asia. So the Portuguese began exploring the coastline of Africa, trying to find that tip so that they could move around Africa into Asia from the Atlantic Ocean into the Indian Ocean, as you see on the map to the right. The first to reach the southern tip of Africa was a man by the name of Bartholomew Diaz. Diaz sails 1487 to 1488. He finally reaches the tip of Africa. When he gets there, he experiences a storm that kind of makes him lose his way a little bit, but he does get around the tip and begins to sail up on Africa, realizes that he's found the tip of Africa, and basically turns around and goes home. He named this tip of Africa the Cape of Good Hope. So the next voyager, knowing where the Cape of Good Hope is, after Diaz laying out the map for him to know where he was going, Vasco da Gama sails around the tip of Africa, sails up the eastern coastline of Africa, and then eventually reaches Calcutta, India, where he loads his boat full of spices, turns around, goes home, and earns a profit of about several thousand%. Okay, so this gets him the riches that he wants. It gets Portugal to know that they can make it to Africa, that this can be profitable, and that they now can work to control this trade within the Indian Ocean that was dominated by Muslim traders. So the spice trade, the Muslims had dominated it, but in 1509, a fleet of Portugal's ships sails into the Indian Ocean, has a battle with the Turkish and Indian ships in the area that are controlling the trade. The Portuguese win this battle, and then they look for other ways to dominate the trade. Once they've controlled the seaways, now they have to find where the spices are coming from, and a man by the name of Alphonse de Albuquerque is the one who seeks that out. He's that man in the picture on the far right. His voyages and travels are laid out on the map, and he was looking for that central spot where all these spices are coming from. So he finds Malacca, here spelled M-A-L-A-K-A, can be spelled M-E-L-A-K-A, but he finds Malacca, which is a central sailing point. It's a dominant port area in the Malay Peninsula, and from here they can control what is known as the Molluscus Islands, also known as the Spice Islands. And the Portuguese are able to dominate that based off of Albuquerque's help, and are able to set up the port cities within the area. And this is the Malacca, or Malay Peninsula, and today this is where the Malacca Strait is, and then the islands can be controlled from there. The Portuguese, however, their empire is very limited. Most of it is by these port cities. They really don't enter into Asia and try to dominate Asia. They don't try to set up colonies in the area. They rely on their port cities. They rely on the trade value of it. They rely on protecting those Molluscus Islands. So there's their empire that they build is fairly limited during the time period. Then we get the Spanish involved. Now Columbus was not Spanish, he was Italian. Grew up Italian, was born in Geneva, Italy, but he believed that he could sail westward to Asia. His map, you see to the right there, um, had a much smaller world. And the circumference of the world to him was about 4,000 miles shorter than what it was. And that's that continent that we live on today, North America, South America. He did not account for that landmass in between. Of course, he had no knowledge of it. Nobody really had any knowledge of it, even though possibly the Vikings had been there. There is now historical reference that possibly the Chinese had been to the west coast and seen California, or the California area that we call it today, but it was not really out there publicized. Again, we got no Twitter, we got no Facebook, we got no CNN, we got no Fox News, so nobody knew that these groups had been there previously, and really didn't have any maps outlaying what was there. So Columbus believes that he can reach Asia and believes that the world is about 4,000 miles shorter than what it is. But again, you see circumference. They know the world's round, really. Being flat, they didn't perceive. Most of the educated individuals within the world knew that by science and math that was growing from the time period, they knew that that the world was round. Okay. So he goes through many different countries trying to get financing. He eventually gets financing through Spain, and Queen Isabella, who kind of took to Columbus, and so she gives up her gold and jewels and silver and stuff to finance Columbus's exploration. So he sails the ocean blue in October of 1492. He does find the islands off the coast of North America and the Cuban, what we call the Cuban area today. The name he gave it was Hispaniola. His subsequent voyages were also in the area. You see there the names that he called the islands. But the first voyage is really seen as a successful voyage because he does make it there. He does see the stuff. But he leaves and goes home, comes back. He's looking for those gold or riches and the spices that he's heard about in Asia, but of course he doesn't find them because he hasn't made it to Asia. He hasn't made it to India. But Columbus believed his entire life, even on his deathbed, he believed that he had found the westward route to Asia, even though many had told him that he hadn't. So then we've got competition between Spain and Portugal over the different areas. They are both getting involved tremendously in this trade, and both want to establish themselves. But they don't want to fight over it because they realize that wars cost money, and they want to profit as much as possible from what they're seeing. So the line of demarcation is established by the Treaty of Tordesillas in 1494. Okay, the Treaty of Tordesillas in 1494 laid that blue line that you see on the map to the right, laying the foundation of which country would get which side. Everything to the west of the line belongs to Spain. So where the blue line is, you see the rest of South America and North America within it. This can be explained by our language. Okay, everything to the east of the line belonged to the Portuguese. So the Portuguese got to trade in Africa, the Indian Ocean, and Spain would not compete over there in the east. Spain would take the area to the west or to the left of the blue line. South America, Central America, and North America. We know today that most of Central America and South America speak Spanish, derived from the Spanish who came there, who settled there, colonized there, brought their culture there, and established themselves in those regions. Where the blue line is, that little part of South America is today Brazil. And if we know our cultural backgrounds, we know that Brazil speaks Portuguese. So this is the one area that the Portuguese did settle in and did colonize, bringing people in. So the cultural aspect of Portugal lies within Brazil. The Treaty of Tordesillas was great for Spain and Portugal. However, it did not say anything about England, did not say anything about France, does not say anything about the Dutch or the Netherlands. So these groups begin to get involved and begin to be competition for the Americas. John Cabot would sail the coastline of the Americas for England. Amerigo Vespucci would sail the coastline of South America and the Hispaniola area as well. This is where we get the name of America. Again, Columbus believed that he found Asia, so he wasn't claiming it as a new continent. Whereas Amerigo Vespucci was going there, drawing up maps, laying it out, sending these maps back to a German map maker in Europe. And that German map maker said, you know what, this guy's doing all this work, he's laying out all these maps, why don't we call these new lands America after Amerigo Vespucci? So that's where the name comes from. It might have been different if Columbus had claimed it in a different way and done some different things. The name might have been different because he was the first to come. But Vespucci is the one that it's named after. The Spanish Empire becomes an empire very quickly. They colonize in America. They build systems. Hernan Cortez comes over and takes over the Aztec Empire. Francisco Pizarro comes into South America. Cortez working in Central America, taking over the Aztec Empire in today's Mexican region, Mexico region. Hernan Cortez working in Peru and the Peruvian Andes and taking over the Incan Empire. So capturing the gold from these two places, the Spanish gained a lot of wealth and they took a lot of gold out of South America. The Portuguese were looking at the instant gratification of getting money back that they had spent on all of these expeditions, finding that tip of Africa to sail into the Indian Ocean and get into that Asian trade market with the Muslims and the Indian traders. The Spanish were kind of looking long term. You know, we don't know what's there, but we believe that there's gold there, and if that gold is there the way we think, then we will earn a lot of money as we conquer the region. And that's what they did. The Spanish conquistadors conquered the region. Queen Isabella declared that the natives, or Indians, Indios as the Spanish word is, were her subjects, and that she granted the Spanish encomienda, or right to use the Native Americans as laborers. Okay, and they did. And the result is that these Native Americans were put to work on sugar plantations and gold and silver mines, and they were forced to do this labor. Starvation comes about, and many of them die because of the diseases that the Europeans brought with them. The major disease, smallpox, and it affects them very, very badly, killing most of the population. So smallpox measles, typhus, things like that caused the deaths of many Native Americans. You also have the missionaries going over. God, glory, and gold. They got their gold. They got their glory from getting the gold. Now they want to bring God to them. And they sent missionaries over to try and convert the Native Americans to Christianity. They were very resistant, didn't understand the ideas, different cultural backgrounds, so that incurs problems. But there were hundreds of thousands of Indians that were there, and some of them understood, took on the culture of the Spanish, brought in the language, and brought in the religion, and adopted into these styles, okay, or were assimilated into these styles. Okay, so the result is a lot of gold. A lot of gold comes out. It's very beneficial for the Spanish. This is how they build their navy, known as the Spanish Armada. Would be the strongest navy of the time. Nobody wanted to kind of go against them. And then the Columbian Exchange as well, where you have all of these goods leaving Europe, being introduced into South America, North South America, mostly in South America, where they grew the best, and then the items leaving North America going back to Europe. So the many, many different goods that went. Okay, as well as disease. Okay, other nations that get involved, like we've said, the Dutch, the English, and the French. The Dutch and the English really begin to dominate the area. They are fighting against each other within the area. They would also battle against the Spanish ships. They would sink each other. They would try to capture the gold off the Spanish ships. The back and forth rivalry, and even the rivalry between the English and the French, still fighting over those areas. The Dutch would originally settle New York. Then the English would come in and take over the area. So, but again, that Treaty of Tordesillas it didn't deal with any other groups, any other countries besides Portugal and Spain. So these countries felt they had the right to get involved and to get into this trading. Alright, so many, many colonies come out of this. You have the balance of trade that comes out of this, where goods are going back and forth. Balance of trade means that you export as many goods as you import, or you send out as many goods as you bring in. It's always better to send out more than you bring in because you make more money that way, but you want to keep a balance of trade happening in some aspect, way, shape, or form. And then mercantilism. Mercantilism is simply the basis of building your system, building your economic levels off the gold and silver that is within your country, or that you're bringing in from to your country by selling those goods, by exporting and importing and all of that kind of stuff. Alright, so this covers section 1 of chapter 13, the age of exploration and the expansion of exploration for our first online set of notes. Thank you for watching. Hope you took some good notes, and you'll bring them to class tomorrow so we can check them out. Good night.